As some of our viewers might know, I have started my professional life in this lifetime as a musician. And my experience as first a piano prodigy, started at the age of 9 to play concerts, and then as a serious musician for touring the world. My experience playing to public, to audiences, was a remarkable one. It's not an ordinary experience. When things really work, you move into another sphere in music. You become one with the public. In fact, the people as individuals disappear. We all are a resonant, vibrating field together beyond any ordinary bounds of space and time. We go anywhere we want and we feel anything we want. There are no limits to that. This is when it really works. Then you are on this high, on this great aesthetic experience, the catharsis, perhaps. So I had that experience, and I always suspected that this is not accidental. It's something, there is something in truth in the world that allows these experiences, that they have a root in the real world. So I started asking, what are they? What kind of a world is this in which one can experience wholeness and oneness? And the higher dimension, or perhaps a deeper dimension. And I started trying for answers. Now here I must add right away, following up this little introspection that I'm doing now, the answers I gave were not limited by convention. Why? Because for the very reason that I was asking these questions, I also have no limits in trying to give the answers. Because I did not lead a conventional life. From the time I was discovered, so to speak, as a musical talent, I have not been part of any standard life expectancy, lifestyle, life community. I have lived a bit outside of the box. Even as a child, I was considered already a piano prodigy and did not. I visited school, but I was a private student. I just went for the exams at the end of the term. And otherwise, I did the studies on my own. And I worked with my mother, who was a piano teacher and had great ambitions herself for becoming a concert pianist. But she started in life too late. In her family, there was not enough understanding for what she really wanted. And if one starts much later than 7 or 8 or 9 years old to work on an instrument like the piano, you cannot make it to that level of perfection that you need as a concert pianist. So she took it out on her son, so to speak. She expected me to become a concert pianist. And it did start like that also. Now, the questions that I asked then were out of the box. Were not the standard question, not limited by anything. I asked, what kind of a world is this? And I did not accept any standard answer. It was any answer I would get from books, from conversations. I would always ask, does that really make sense? And being a musician, you are very intuitive. You know how to rely on your intuition. Does it sound good? Is it really likely to be true? What do you feel about it? You know? So I asked these questions and I tested them against my feelings. So I was wide-ranging answers, wide-ranging inquiry. Is this world really a material sphere? Is this one limited to bodies moving about in space and in time? Is there more to it? Is everything we know coming to us through our senses? Could there be more to it? And these questions led me to different concepts. First, to the idea of, which nowadays is very much known, but it wasn't at the time, namely of interaction, interdependence, namely of the kind of world where everything affects everything else. I was thinking, if I have these experiences, perhaps they are part of a chain of experiences that are rooted in reality, which itself is a chain of events. All things connected and together producing this experience that we have. So maybe our experience is not just limited to the here and now, what we perceive with our eyes, our ears, etc. So I did not hesitate to explore this possibility. The experience I had in music was beyond the ordinary bounds of the senses, and I asked, what kind of a world is it in which such experiences can come about? Truly, the first concept that came is that beyond, above or below, someplace, somehow beyond the everyday world that we experience, there is another reality, a higher reality, a transcendent reality. Now, I was not about to go into any religious dogma or doctrine and say, well, this is it. It's been written over here, this is how it must be. Because I was asking questions out of the box, I was not ready to accept any prepackaged answer, as it were. So I explored, what kind of a world could that be? And the answers that I came up with were more based on process than on existence, more on becoming than on being. Constantly, things are moving, constantly developing, constantly evolving. Things are not what they are, things are what become, and things are what they relate, how they relate to others. Then I discovered some philosophies and thought and thinkers, for example, the process thinkers like Alfred North Whitehead, who said that a thing in a world is what it is because of its relations to everything else. And it is also something that is constantly becoming. So my first concept was this relational becoming, relational interdependence. Then to my great amazement, I discovered that this is the Buddhist notion of reality. Interdependent co-origination, it's called in the Buddhist philosophy. I didn't know that others were thinking like this. There's a whole tradition like this. I started exploring this more and more. I had a number of experiences that I will recount perhaps in a moment, but the gist of it was that I moved from the idea of single things moving in space and time to the idea of things so related together that they make each other, they create each other. They become what they are because of each other, you know. And this had to be embedded in something. Reality had to have a basis in something. So then the question asks, what is this reality grounded in? Obviously, it was not grounded in anything hard, feeling like some solid matter, a rock or whatever, you know. It had to be grounded in something fluid, but yet meaningful. I came across, but I came across in my inquiry the idea of a field. Now, a field is, nowadays we speak very much more field because it's an age of technology, of information. It was before that. So it was a fairly new idea. But in the sciences, especially biology, it was already existing, already started up, this notion of a field in which the organism appears, a field of life. Also going back again to ancient traditions, a field in which all living things can evolve. But could it be a single field, or would it be part of the overall field of the world, of the reality, in which these experiences are field experiences? I moved from there to the idea that all this field is basically not something solid and material. It's real, all right, it's real, but it's not something concrete, cannot be limited to the here and now. But think what happens in this field at any one part, also happening in the other parts. It's all happening together. It's all evolving as one thing. And now this was, just to recall, way before the quantum revolution. See? It was in the 1950s, 1960s. Some scientists already had these notions, but the wide quantum revolution, end of the 20th century, didn't arrive yet at that time. So I asked myself, could this field be a psychic field, a mental field? But I did not like, finally, the idea that we just have to give up our notions of reality and say everything is a thought. If it's a thought, if it's an idea, also that must be rooted in something that produces that thought, that idea. So the field as an informational reality. That was then the next step. And that's where I'm still today. Some place where I think that the world is running on information, and the field is primarily energy of a particular kind, not a random energy, but a highly focused energy, moving in a given direction. Now this to me has always been very intriguing, I might also say satisfactory, because it gives answers to the question, why are we here? And also, where are we going? Because the answer to why we are here is to go where we are meant to go. So if there is a purpose underlying things, then we are here as an instrument to fulfill that purpose. Maybe the instrument is our thinking, is our consciousness, is our mind, but it is here to explore a reality which is also beyond that, with which is connected, but it's not limited to that. There is a reality beyond the mind. Of course, I started reading major philosophers, East and West, and discovered that what I'm thinking of exploring has been known for thousands of years, has been explored, developed. But I did it, I think, in the right order. Most students of philosophy and of science, but especially philosophy, work in the wrong order. They get the answers before they pose the questions. When you go to an academy, to a school, to a university, you're being taught all kinds of doctrines and answers to questions that you didn't ask. The real philosophy, I think, the real insight comes from asking. And asking the kind of questions that I've been asking myself in a very presumptuous way. Because in my early 20s, mid-20s and late 20s, then I somehow had the idea that if I am serious about posing these questions, then I'll come to insights, even though everything has already been explored and written about. Maybe I can come up with something new, certainly something that will satisfy me more. It's a presumption I would hesitate to undertake today, but I still believe that there are things to be explored, to discover. But at that time, I looked at the world as an open arena for exploration, something that you can get to know. And when you get to know, you get the world, then you get to know yourself. Because this idea that I am speaking of myself in the self-exploration mode, that I myself am very much a part of what I experience. I'm not here and what I experience being over there. I am the experience. And I evolve, because the world evolves. I become something. And this process philosophy applied to the mind didn't become for me a kind of idealism where we said that all there is mind and everything is mind. Mind is an element of this. The consciousness is an element of this. But the whole thing cannot be said is purely mind any more than it's said it can be purely matter of things. It's something beyond all that. And then, strangely, or perhaps not so strangely, I ended up till now, at least up to this point, because I want to evolve, continue to think about this, I ended up with something like Oriental or basic mysticism. The idea that the fundamental element of the universe is a mystical intelligence, is an intelligence that decides, that conducts, that guides, in a way, governs, but in the cybernetic sense of governing, as a governing function, guides the way things evolve. There is something that is being realized in this world. There's something that is becoming in the world, which is bigger than you and me, which is bigger than any human being. But it is something that we can try to explore. We will never get to the bottom of it, but we will understand perhaps a little bit, always a little bit more. And that understanding can give us answers as to who we are, why we are here, where we come from, where we are going. Included in this exploration is the idea that there is more to the world than what we perceive with our senses. If you assume that, and you're willing to ask for questions without limits, leading a life out of the box, so to speak, where you don't feel limited, and you are presumptuous to the extent that you think you can find answers, then you get, I think, to these ideas that I've got to. I still believe that these are the most logical ideas, the most coherent ideas. The world is really, truly like a great idea, but it's not just an idea. It's everything that there is idea-like, mental-like. It's there, of course, in all the great philosophies, in Spinoza, in Hegel, in wherever you look. It's in the Eastern philosophies, it's all there. But I discovered it for myself, the hard way. I asked myself these questions. I was privileged in the sense that I could ask these questions. I had the opportunity. I led a life as a concert pianist until I was in my mid-30s. I was exploring these questions. I was reading, I was writing, I was publishing also. But I could survive without being forced into a mold, into a box. And I'm very grateful to have had this opportunity to do so. And I always continued doing this. I'm feeling that is part of my goal in life, part of my mission in life, to ask questions without limits as to ordinary, everyday rationality. Ask questions and explore where they will take me. So this lifetime of exploration, which has been going on now for well over half a century, is perhaps my mission in life, what I want to communicate as my legacy, the fruits of this exploration. Not because it's a final answer, but it's the answer that somebody who dared to ask the questions, and was lucky enough to have the opportunity to explore, to look for answers. These are the answers that I've come up with in this lifetime. I should add that I believe that this is not the only lifetime, that these explorations, that this adventure of mind in the universe will continue beyond any individual lifetime. And that perhaps the one lifetime can prepare the ground for another. And so then let's address this one last question about why I was engaging in these explorations. Because I've come to believe, cautiously believe, not dogmatically, that what I'm doing now in this lifetime will affect my future lifetimes and will affect the lives of others, now and in the future. That we are sufficiently interdependent, interacting, sufficiently co-evolving. So what happens to one, especially to one consciousness, one mind, also affects others. So if I come up with some answers, some hunches as to what this bigger reality that we call the universe may be like, then that could possibly be of use to others. So it's worth communicating. My attempt at communicating were unintentional. It came about accidentally, and I will recount some of those anecdotes in a moment. But I never really intended what I was doing to be written down, to be recorded, to be conveyed. I did it for myself because I wanted to find out. And I believed that by finding out for myself, I help others, even without having to put it on paper or on tape or whatever. So I'm here now when I can communicate and I wish to communicate. And this lifetime of experiences is possibly the kind of experience that will enrich the experience of others. And this could have concrete implications, concrete consequences. In the last count, who we are is what our consciousness is. We see the world through our consciousness. If that changes, if that grows and evolves, will act differently. And perhaps it has this indirect but very meaningful effect. When you come to true insights, you change yourself, and by changing yourself, you change the world. Another presumption, if you like. But it's something that motivated me to continue these explorations, and now motivates me to try to summarize it as part of my legacy, apparently me an element of my legacy for whoever wishes to enter into it. My explorations began as a concert pianist. Not a regular, normal concert pianist, but as a child. I remember the first concert in Budapest with the Budapest Philharmonic, the first public concert, because I played many times in private, in salons. You know, it was fashionable in those days to have in private salons, and you invite people. You have 20, 30, maybe up to 50 people, and somebody is invited to play music. You know. And I did that from the time I was 7 years old, when I discovered that I have some gift for music. Indeed, it was very simple for me to play music. Didn't have to study it too much. Even to this day, I'm very poor at reading scores. I hardly ever learned from scores. As a child, I learned by my mother playing for me a piece, and I would then play it again. I would play it, I would pick it up and continue, or just learn that. But I never studied it from a score, much less studied what the composer had in mind. I just intuitively, I played the music. You know. So I played private concerts like this, and then when I was 9, I played with the Budapest Philharmonic in a concert hall, which still exists in Budapest, and it was a memorable event. But you would think that this is a big event for a child, but I was more interested in the gifts that I would get after each of these appearances, which were usually a beautiful wreath. That was at those days, you're giving a wreath, which had a silk ribbon and with all the data of the concert on it, and I had a wall of my room in my parents' apartment covered with these decorations on the wall. So I was interested in that. I was also interested in the candies I would be getting, you know, on after each concert. And so the first concert that I had at the age of 9, I played a Mozart piano concerto. And when I walked out on the stage, there was a sort of, instead of the usual applause, there was a sort of some astonished people laughing and sort of talking to each other. Ha 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 ha, what's that? Because there was a child, a 9-year-old child in shorts moving up on the stage. Who was he? It only turned out who he was when I sat down in front of the piano. And the orchestra started playing the concerto, and I went on and played. So it was a big experience for the public, and it was then remarked many times, and I was asked to play at a concert. For me, the principal experience was seeing the lady who was the sponsor of many musicians. She was a wealthy, well-to-do lady, and who was not there at the beginning of the concert, and I missed her because she is the one who usually brought me all the candies and the flowers and everything. And in the first movement of this concerto, I saw a little commotion there in the first row, and there was the lady coming in, and I was so pleased to have see her, and she was holding a big basket in her arm, and I was so pleased to look at it that I speculated for a moment what could be in that basket, and failed to come in on time when the piano was supposed to come in with the orchestra. And I remember to this moment, the conductor turning around with astonishment and looking at me. There was a child. What's he doing? You know, he's not coming in when he should be. Turning to me and lifting the score. And this movement on his part of turning to me and lifting the score, it gave me such a fright. It gave me such a sensation. My God, what am I doing? You know, that I never forgot it. I've always been extra careful as a musician as to know exactly what I'm doing. And to stay concentrated, you know. This is something that imprinted itself on my mind. But anyway, the concert went well. I duly got the candy and the wreath afterwards, so it all went very well. And I then the war years came, but after the war years I continued playing. And the big event was that when I was 15 years old, I could be registered as a candidate as a participant for the international music competition in Geneva, which took place once a year in September. It was after the war. It was the second time in September of the, I think it's 45, I believe. And I could, the previous year I couldn't be accepted because I was 14 years old, and this time I was 15 years old. I already had my degree from music, from the Academy of Music, and I was sent out as a participant on behalf of the state or ministry in Hungary, because these were the years, as some of the viewers will remember, of the Cold War, the Iron Curtain. You couldn't move from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, except by very special permission. So I got this permission. And because I was just turned 15, I could go. My mother could come with me, being a minor. And we went out carrying a small suitcase, which is all they would let us to carry, and having a passport which was valid for all of 3 weeks. We were expected to return. And then when I got one of the grand prizes there, jointly with a Spanish pianist, then I didn't return because offers to go on. And carrying the small suitcase, went on to Paris and then to other cities, and managed to get an international visa, an international passport, which was limited in its validity, but it served for the time being. And so I never returned to my native Hungary to live after that. Interestingly enough, that international passport was then supplemented, or rather substituted, by the resident permit in the US, not by a normal means, because the normal means would have been a quota from Hungary, which would take 6 years to run through, because there were a very limited number of people who were accepted, but a special quota, a special permission, which was done through what was known as a private bill by a senator of the US, Senator Pepper, who heard my concert in Washington in the Constitution Hall. And he asked if there is anything he can do for me. I said, certainly, Senator, something you can do for me. Stop me from being deported, because my visa for the US on this international passport would have expired the following week, and I would have to return it, and I would like to stay. And Senator Pepper said, come see me in my office tomorrow in the Capitol building. I did, and he said, don't worry, I'll introduce a private bill in the Congress to nominate you for citizenship. And even though that'll take maybe up to a year to run through, but in the meanwhile, you can't be deported, you can stay. And I said, fine. And so he signed the papers, and not about 6 or 8 months later, I got my US citizenship based on the private bill in Congress. Anyway, the next step was in this adventurous developments from concert pianist was an event, a New Year's event, which was not a musical event, but it was the first New Year after my first son was born. And with my wife, we went out to the Austrian Alps for that weekend, and we skated. We looked at these beautiful Alpine regions, and at night, that night, before going to sleep, I looked out on the balcony of our hotel in Garmisch. That was the name of the town, and there I saw the villages like pearls lying in the snow all around us, and the peaks of the mountains. And I said, you know, those thoughts that I've had ever since as a child about what meaning there is to life, and if there is more to it than what we see, I should look at those more seriously. And then at that moment, I had the resolve that together with my life as a concert pianist, I would also start reading, start attending courses. I inscribed in various courses in New York, for example, at Columbia, at the famous New School for Social Research, in Munich at the university there, wherever I was. And I followed these courses without actually taking degrees, because I already had a music degree, and I was a concert pianist. I didn't need any other degree. But there I was, busily following the courses, making notes, reading, taking notes, and writing as well. So this resolve resulted in my becoming serious about exploring these things that I talked about. The next major step came when these explorations gave rise to a first step in a professional career, the change of career. Unexpected, totally, but perhaps not entirely meaningless or accidental. I had a concert in The Hague, in Holland, and I was feeling very well because I thought the concert went well. And after the concert, there was a usual dinner served near the concert hall. And this was also near the hotel where I stayed. And in this dinner, some special guests were invited, and one of them started talking to me and asking me whether I ever thought why I'm doing what I'm doing, what good is it? And this sort of challenged me, you know, what am I really doing? Playing concerts, spending my life, you know, playing in the public. And I said, yes, indeed, I've thought about these things. And he said, did you ever write anything down? I said, sure. I'm always carrying, my notebook is with me always. It became quite a thick book. And I have it with me. He said, can I read it? Okay, I was feeling good. It was after the concert. I thought it went well. So I went over to my room and got him a pile of notes. And he said, here, I don't know what to do with it. I keep writing every day on it, but this is just what occurs to me. And he said, thank you. And we talked to others. And then I looked around and he wasn't there anymore. These were handwritten notes, and I was a bit worried about what happened. I didn't have any copies. But he showed up next morning, and he said, we will publish it. And I said, who are you? I said, well, the gentleman who I met you last night turned out to be the editor of a prestigious publishing house, Martinus Nijhoff of the Hague in Holland. And indeed, he did publish it. It wasn't as simple as that, because it took a year to put the notes into order, and the chapters, make references, and so on. He helped me with the formalities. But this is how my book got published, the first book. And this is the first time it occurred to me that what I'm doing for myself could be of interest to anybody else. Up till then, I didn't even show it to others, because my sense was that people don't take seriously what a concert artist is doing when he starts philosophizing. Leave that to philosophers and to scientists to just play the music. But somehow I was very protective about it. But here the book appeared. It was in 1963 that it appeared. This incident was in 61. In 1963, it was my first book. I was 31 years old at the time. And that changed my whole career, my whole life, because this book came to the attention of various people, including the head of the Department of Philosophy at Yale University, who at one point just simply invited me and said, come over and give a series of seminars on the ideas of your book, which were ideas very close to Whitehead and then to Prigogine, Van Bertalanffy and others. No, Prigogine came later, but Van Bertalanffy, yes. So I didn't know what to do. I was on the horns of a dilemma, because you can't do serious seminars at Yale and at the same time live the life of a concert artist. You have to choose, at least for the time being. And I was undecided, until it was also decided for me by an incident which happened in Bonn. Now, Bonn is the birthplace of Ludwig van Beethoven, who lived most of his life in Vienna, but he was born in Bonn, near Cologne. And this town, to this day, remains a kind of a shrine to the genius of Beethoven. And I was very honored by having been asked to give a recital of Beethoven's sonatas in Bonn. I was traveling to this concert, and I remember forgetting to get off the train because I was so busy thinking about my thought that I had to finally jump off, because we already arrived, and I was deep in thinking about ideas of evolution and universal interdependence and all these things. And during the concert, I kept thinking about it. It was very difficult to remove my mind. So while I was playing, as it happened, the Sonata Opus 53, which is known as the Waldstein Sonata, while I was playing it, I was thinking about these ideas, and I forgot where I was. And in the middle of the second movement, which has a usual structure, you know, where you play the first part, then the second part, then you go back to the first part, then go back to the second part, you continue in a different way, you know, to the end. So in the middle of that part, when I was playing the main theme, I realized that here I'm sitting in a concert hall playing the second movement of the sonata, and I don't know if I play it for the first time or for the second time, because it comes back again. See, if I make the wrong decision, I either skip the entire rest of the movement, or I repeat it. Either one would be very unpleasant, unprecedented. So I said, I had to jump and make a decision. I decided it's already played it. I go on to the third movement. And nobody said anything. Must have been the right decision. But then I said, if this turns out to be the right decision, I am going to accept the offer from Yale. Next morning, I went to the post office. I sent a telegram and to the head of the Department of Philosophy, Professor Schrader, and I said, I'm coming. And that meant that I had to give up the life of a concert artist and become an academic. From Yale, I went on to other places. I met another guest professor at Yale who was from the big university in Paris, Sorbonne. And he said, I read your book and I would like you to present these ideas at the Sorbonne. And how could we do this? And I said, very simple, if you invite me to present a thesis for a doctorate. He said, of course. And so I presented a thesis, a doctoral thesis at the Sorbonne, for which I got a doctoral degree at the Sorbonne, without ever having attended a university in my life, except in this very informal way of sitting in classes. Then I got jobs of teaching in various universities in the US, and then in other places as well, but in the US, in the West Coast, in the Middle East, and the East. And I was in the curious position of teaching students who are already well into the subject matter of philosophy, and I have never learned any of that. I was just working on my own, exploring my own. So I didn't even know one of the biggest problems I had. I didn't know how to give an exam. I never took an exam in a university, All through these years of teaching and acting as an academic, my music was in the background, but it created both inspiration and framework. It was a framework for seeking something in science, seeking wholeness, seeking completion, seeking meaning, not just the part. I would never look at just one thing as a thing in itself. I would always look, how is it related to the rest? In music, a single tone doesn't make any sense, doesn't have a meaning. Only the relationship has a meaning. So I was always looking. A single statement in philosophy or science doesn't have a meaning in itself. What is the whole thing that will convince the meaning? What is the whole thing that we want to know? What kind of a world is this? Always the big questions. So I never stopped with a given question. I always asked, how is this possible in the world in which we live? Is the experience that we have of this world. That's why I always pursued the big questions, and I didn't really care what in the profession my colleagues would say to that. I just went ahead. Music is an experience of meaning and wholeness. And that's a mystical quest. But it's the quest, I think, basically to all great thinkers, whether they call themselves scientists or theologians or mystics or whatever. The ideas that I could pursue, I insisted on pursuing, led me to some concepts, some insights that have practical consequences. Practice in the sense that you could apply it to your life. Systems theory was new at the time when I started working with it, in the 60s and 70s. Now it's very widespread. But systems theory says that one thing is always connected so that together they create an action, a development. And I would say to young people, don't look only at the part, at the single element. Look at how it hangs together. What does it finally do? What does it do to you? What does it do to your world? Think systemically, which today in a less forbidding way, perhaps you can say, think holistically. And this is mysticism in one way, but it's not science. In between came quantum science, quantum theory, which shows that each thing in a system, in a quantum system, is so related to the others that simultaneously, non-locally, all things occur together. So I would say to young people, look at the context and try to understand how your situation, your existence in this world can relate to that, so that that context becomes more whole, more true. We talked about before, and we will talk again, about the fact that what there is in the world is a series of co-evolutions, series of things that are evolving together. And only when that co-evolution is moving forward is your participation in it meaningful. Only when you contribute to that co-evolution. Because the world does not run by looking at the whole. The world looks at only what happens now in a momentary way and only in one part, and disregards the rest. So bringing this back, it's not only idealistic, it's very, very practical. Because unless you look at the whole thing, how it develops, how it hangs together, how what you do belongs to that. Otherwise, you can go off in the wrong tangent and you won't find out until you notice that really it doesn't lead anywhere. What leads someplace is this total system that evolves with you as a part of it.